They say the Appalachian Mountains are older than bones, older than silence itself. But beneath their beauty lies something deeply wrong. People vanish on marked trails. Cabins appear where none should stand. Voices whisper from fire towers, long abandoned. A girl in white waves you deeper into the trees, and if you follow her, you don't come back. Hunters see deer that walk like men, and sometimes, you find a journal that doesn't want to be read. These are the scariest true encounters from deep within the Appalachian wild stories, not just told, but felt. If you're brave enough to enter, don't forget to subscribe to Farcical Fears, where every shadow has a voice, and every voice tells the truth you don't want to believe. Let's move to our first story. The Screaming Shelter. Deep within the dense, shadowed wilderness of the Appalachian Mountains, hidden among towering ancient trees and tangled underbrush, lies a place few speak of, and fewer have ever seen a decrepit wooden shelter that the locals refer to, only in whispers, as the Screaming Shelter. It is a place shrouded in mystery and dread, a name passed down through generations like a warning. Some say it was built as a refuge from the brutal winter storms that ravaged the mountains. But others claim it was a prison, a place where unspeakable horrors unfolded, and voices of the damned still echo beneath its rotten roof. This story begins with Caleb, a man driven by equal parts fascination and disbelief, whose obsession with the Appalachian legends led him deep into the forest in search of answers. Caleb was a history buff and a seasoned hiker, the kind of man who felt alive only when venturing far beyond well-marked trails, into the heart of forgotten places. Over the years, he had heard countless rumors about strange disappearances, eerie sounds, and haunted ruins scattered across the Appalachians. But nothing captivated him as much as the tale of the Screaming Shelter, a small, weathered cabin, hidden somewhere along an obscure, unmarked trail. The story had come to him through an old, dust-covered journal he discovered in a remote library archive. The journal's author spoke in hushed tones about a shelter used during the harshest winters, warning that those who sought refuge inside never came out unchanged, and some never left at all. It was this journal, full of cryptic notes and faded sketches, that pulled Caleb into the woods that chilly autumn morning. He set out alone, armed with the journal, a map crudely annotated with landmarks like the tree that bleeds and the hollow where the wind screams. The sun filtered weakly through thick clouds as he trekked beneath the skeletal branches of towering oaks and pines. The forest felt alive in an unsettling way. The shadows moved just out of sight, and every rustle of leaves seemed amplified, as if the woods themselves were watching. The deeper he ventured, the colder and more oppressive the air became, carrying a heaviness that pressed down on his chest. After hours of struggling through thick brush and uneven terrain, Caleb stumbled into a small clearing. There, before him, stood the shelter. The cabin was a pitiful thing, its wooden boards blackened by years of rain and rot, roof sagging and half-collapsed. It looked abandoned for decades, yet a strange aura clung to Itan energy so dense it made Caleb's skin crawl. Against every instinct telling him to run, he stepped forward and pushed open the creaking door. The interior was shrouded in darkness, lit only by shafts of dying sunlight through the broken windows. The smell hit him immediately, nauseating, mix of mold, decay, and something metallic, like old blood. Caleb's flashlight flickered as he scanned the room. Broken glass crunched underfoot, and rusted tools lay scattered across the dirt floor. On the cracked wooden walls were scratched carvings, names, dates, and strange symbols that resembled ancient runes. His heart pounded louder with each breath. Then, from somewhere beyond the cabin, a scream tore through the silence, wild, raw, and agonized. It wasn't the scream of an animal, but the sound of pure human terror, fractured and echoing through the trees. It froze Caleb in place. The scream faded, but an echo of it remained, a chilling vibration that seemed to come from beneath the shelter itself. Caleb noticed a loose floorboard, and with trembling hands, pried it open to reveal a narrow stairwell descending into the earth. A thick blackness waited below, swallowing his lantern light. A rotten coppery smell rose up, mixing with the screams that now seemed to echo from beneath the ground. Against every warning in his mind, Caleb climbed down. The subterranean chamber was a narrow, claustrophobic space carved from cold stone, its walls stained with dark patches that glistened ominously. Rusted shackles hung from the walls, and broken chains lay tangled on the floor, alongside fragments of torn, moth-eaten clothing. Caleb realized with horror that this was no mere shelter. It was a prison, a place where people had been confined, tortured, and left to die. The screams intensified, a chorus of desperate voices crying out in anguish, pleading for release from their eternal torment. Caleb's lantern flickered, as shadows seemed to stretch and writhe along the walls, forming shapes that twisted and contorted like living nightmares. The air grew heavier, colder, suffused with an evil that clawed at his sanity. A voice, deep, guttural, and ancient, whispered warnings in a language Caleb could not understand, promising death to those who lingered. Panicked, Caleb scrambled back up the stairs, slamming the hatch shut just as the screams exploded into a horrific cacophony. Outside, he bolted from the shelter and ran blindly through the dark woods, branches tearing at his clothes and skin, until the terrifying sounds finally faded behind him. But escaping the shelter did not mean escaping its curse. Back in his small cabin, days later, Caleb began to notice strange things. Shadows flickered in his peripheral vision, vanishing when he looked directly. Faint scratching noises came from the walls at night. Most disturbing of all were the marks on his skin-deep raw scars shaped like the names carved inside the shelter. In his dreams he heard the screams again, louder and more agonizing, pulling him toward the shelter's dark depths. Caleb realized the screaming shelter had marked him, binding his fate to the restless souls trapped beneath those rotting floorboards. He was no longer just an observer of the horror. He had become a part of it. And deep in the Appalachian wilderness, some places are not just haunted by memories, but by curses that refuse to die, screaming endlessly for release or revenge. Let's move to our second story. They call it The Watcher in the Rocks. A chilling title passed quietly through the Appalachian towns, whispered with a mix of fear and disbelief. The story starts with a couple, Amelia and Grant Miller, experienced backpackers and amateur nature photographers, who'd been exploring different parts of the eastern United States for years. But it was the towering solitude of the Appalachians that called to them the most. When they stumbled across a little-known hiking trail in a remote county near the Kentucky-Virginia border, they felt like they'd struck gold. The trail was overgrown, unmarked on public maps, and from all appearances, completely forgotten. Just how they liked it. They parked their SUV at the end of a worn gravel road and set out with gear on their backs, documenting mossy rocks, rare bird calls, and shafts of golden light piercing through thick pine canopies. The air smelled of wet bark and iron. For hours, nothing but the rhythmic crunch of boots and chirps of hidden creatures accompanied them. But the higher they climbed, the quieter the forest became. Not peacefully quiet, but oppressively so. It wasn't long before Amelia whispered the words that would later haunt Grant. "Do you feel like we're being watched?" They brushed it off. Isolation has a way of stirring up ancient instincts, especially in unfamiliar woods. But then, they found something completely out of place. A narrow clearing opened ahead, and in the center sat a small stone altar, moss-covered, weather-beaten, and surrounded by a perfectly circular arrangement of standing stones. Some were as tall as a man, others barely poked above the grass. Each bore deep carvings, spirals, eyes, teeth, symbols neither could identify. Grant raised his camera. As he focused the lens, something moved behind the stones. A figure, fleeting, tall, thin, and pale, ducked behind one of the pillars before disappearing. Grant blinked, then turned to Amelia. Her face had gone pale. She'd seen it too, instead of turning back. They made the fatal decision to stay that night. They pitched their tent far from the stone circle, but couldn't escape the oppressive silence. No insects, no wind, just the sound of their own breathing. Around 3 a.m., Amelia sat bolt upright, her eyes wide. "Something's walking outside the tent," she whispered. Grant reached for his flashlight and unzipped the flap just an inch. Nothing but the footsteps stopped. Then, right before he shut the flap, he saw it again, those pale, long fingers wrapping around the edge of a nearby tree. The figure's face was hidden, but its presence was undeniable. It was watching them. Sleep became impossible after that. They packed up at sunrise and rushed back down the trail. But the trail wasn't the same. Trees had shifted. Familiar landmarks were gone. The forest seemed to be ... folding in on itself. Hours passed. Their compass spun uselessly. GPS. Dead Amelia began crying. She swore the same rotting log had appeared 3 times in the past half hour. Panic set in. Then they heard the whispering. Low at first, like wind slipping between cracks, but rising in tone and urgency. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language. It was as if the rocks themselves were speaking, old, angry, and aware. Grant screamed at the trees, demanding to know who was there. Silence. Then Amelia screamed. She pointed to a nearby ridge. The Watcher stood there clearly now, at least 7 feet tall, with elongated limbs, skin like weathered marble, and black pits for eyes. It didn't move like a person. Its head tilted too far, its fingers bent the wrong way, and its mouth hung open as if screaming, but no sound came. The Watcher just stared. Watching, Grant grabbed Amelia's hand and ran. They didn't stop until night fell again, and even then, they only paused under a rock overhang, too tired to move, too scared to sleep. That night, the whispers returned, louder this time, closer. The Watcher's silhouette could be seen between the trees, pacing, circling, never entering the firelight, always watching, and then, just before dawn, Amelia vanished. One moment she was beside him, the next, nothing. No scream, no sound, no drag marks. Her bag remained, her flashlight, even her boots. Grant lost it. He screamed, ran through the forest like a madman, calling her name. He screamed until his voice gave out. Until the Watcher appeared again. Closer this time, Grant collapsed from exhaustion. And when he awoke, he was lying just feet from the stone circle, the altar, the standing stones, all back again, as if he had never left. But the Watcher was gone somehow. Grant found the trailhead again that evening. A search party was dispatched, but no trace of Amelia was ever found. Their story became legend. Grant never returned to the woods. In fact, he never spoke again. Whatever he saw out there, whatever took her, broke him. Some locals say, the Watcher only appears to those who look too long into the old stones. Others think the carvings marked Amelia, that she became part of some ancient rite. There are those who believe the Watcher is not a creature, but a guardian, protecting the world from something that sleeps beneath those stones. But the most chilling part, Grant's camera was recovered weeks later, found leaning against the altar. The last photo taken shows Amelia standing alone, outside the circle, her eyes wide in terror, and behind her, a tall pale figure, one hand already on her shoulder. Say the Appalachians are old, but some things inside them are older still, and they're not asleep anymore. Let's move to our third story. They call it the hollowing tree, but nobody in the nearby Appalachian town of Braxton likes to talk about why. The name lingers in whispered warnings and passed down superstitions, something locals teach their children, the same way they teach them to stay away from fire. It was said to be just an old tree, gnarled and twisted, growing near the mouth of a dried-up riverbed, deep in the forest, nothing extraordinary, unless you happened to look at it for too long. Then it started to look ... wrong. Not broken, or dead, but listening. When I first heard about it, I assumed it was just another backwoods myth, a local scarecrow tale meant to keep teenagers from partying in the woods. I was new to Braxton, fresh off a breakup, and looking for a place quiet enough to rebuild myself. I'd rented a small cabin about 5 miles out of town, nestled at the foot of a gentle mountain slope, right near the tree line. The forest seemed like peace, dense and green and quiet. It had a stillness I mistook for safety. In truth, it was silence waiting for a reason to scream. It began subtly. My dog, Max, a big mutt, with more muscle than sense, refused to go near the back edge of the property. Every time we went for a walk, he'd stop dead at the edge of the trees and whine, tugging to turn back. I figured it was a bear scent, maybe a bobcat, and didn't press it. But then came the scratching. It happened the first night a storm rolled Through around 2 a.m., I woke up to a soft, rhythmic scratching not at the door or the windows, but from under the house. Max was growling, low and steady, ears perked and eyes focused on the floor. I got up, flashlight in hand, and looked. Beneath the cabin, nothing. Just wet leaves and old boards. I chalked it up to branches or raccoons, and went back to bed, though sleep didn't come easy. 3 nights later, it came again. This time the scratching was followed by a faint, almost imperceptible humming, like a tune played on broken glass. That night I dreamed of roots wrapping around my legs, pulling me into the soil that pulsed like a heartbeat. I woke up gasping for breath, fingers clenching the bed frame. The next morning, I went into town and mentioned it to an old man. At the diner, his fork paused halfway to his mouth, and he looked me dead in the eyes. "You near the hollowing tree?" I asked what that was. He set the fork down and said, "If you've seen it, you'd know. Looks like something God forgot to finish. Like it wants to be a tree, but ain't." He wouldn't say more, but that was enough to dig the curiosity deeper into my brain. That night, I hiked past where Max would go, deep into the woods. Flashlight slicing through the growing dark. After about 30 minutes, I found it. It wasn't the biggest tree, but it was the wrongest. Black bark like burnt flesh, twisted into unnatural spirals, and a hollow at its base, wide enough for a grown man to crawl inside. That hollow ... it didn't feel like an opening, it felt like a mouth. I stood there, staring, heart pounding, when I heard it again, the humming. But this time it was clearer, almost a lullaby, sung off-key by a voice that had never learned to be human. My skin prickled. Something moved in the hollow, just a flicker, like the glint of wet eyes. I turned and ran, branches whipping at my arms, lungs burning. When I got back to the cabin, Max was gone. I searched all night, screaming his name into the woods. Nothing, not a sound, not a paw print. It was as if he had evaporated. The next day, I followed my trail back to the tree. No Max. But near the hollow, I found a collar, his collar. It wasn't torn or broken, just sitting there, like someone had placed it that night. I boarded up my windows and sat with a shotgun on my lap, every light in the house on. Around 3 a.m., the scratching came again now, at the walls. Not under, not beside, around, like something circling the house. And the humming, always the humming. I shouted into the darkness, fired a shot into the trees, but the sound didn't stop, it only moved. From wall to wall. Then the whispering began. Not words, just breath, shaped like language. And always from just behind me. When the sun rose, it all stopped. I walked outside to find small holes dug in a perfect circle around the cabin, not animal holes, shallow indentations, exactly the size of human fingers. 10 of them, side by side, like something had crawled around the cabin in the night, dragging its nails. That day I drove back into town, told the sheriff what had been happening. He didn't laugh, just gave me a tight nod and said, "It's been a while since someone new got too close." Then he told me what they knew. According to the oldest records, the tree had been there before Braxton was settled. Indigenous legends warned of a spirit that lived underground, one that would surface through the mouth of the earth to claim what had been lost. The tree, they believed, was that mouth. It whispered to people, lured them, took from them, and, every few decades, someone disappeared. A child, a drifter, a hunter. No one ever found the bodies. I should have packed up and left. I really should have. But I couldn't let go of Max. Or maybe something was already whispering to me. Even then, I decided I was going to burn it. If it was some old spirit, maybe fire would stop it, that night. I hiked back with kerosene and a lighter. When I reached the tree, I heard the humming again, louder now, faster. And from within the hollow, I saw movement. Not just eyes this time. A hand, pale, long-fingered, reaching out in slow, twitching pulses. Behind it, a face. Not Max's face, but wearing his eyes. Eyes that looked at me and recognized me. I froze. The lighter dropped. And then the tree began to groan. Not creak groan, like something was trying to push itself through solid wood. The bark split. A shape began to emerge. Not born, not summoned, like it had always been there, and my fear had fed it enough to come through. I ran. I didn't stop until I was back in the cabin, and I locked the door behind me. The power went out. Then came the sound-wet footsteps across the floorboards. I turned slowly. There was mud inside. The door had never opened. The footsteps were coming from the hallway, from the crawl space beneath my bed, from inside the walls. I fled that night. Drove until the gaslight came on, and kept going. I haven't been back, but sometimes, when I try to sleep in a cheap motel somewhere miles away from Braxton, I hear humming just outside the window. I don't look, because I know what I'll see, and I know it'll have Max's eyes. Let's move to our fourth story. They call it the Hollow House. Not many know that name anymore. Only the oldest folks in Elkhorn Hollow still whisper it, and only in hushed tones, like speaking it too loud might wake something buried. It's not on any map, not in any land registry, and yet, those who've lived here long enough know that somewhere beyond the tree line, deeper than any sane person should hike, there's a structure that doesn't belong. A house that breathes in silence. A house that waits. I was 17. The summer we found it. Back then, I didn't believe in much, not ghosts, not curses, not the quiet dread that creeps in when you feel watched and alone. I had my two best friends, a beat-up Walkman, and the kind of invincibility only teenagers can afford. My name is Jonah, and what I'm about to share, I haven't told anyone in full until now. We were four, me, my cousin Trevor, our childhood friend Lucas, and his sister Emily. Emily was always the wild one, the daredevil who could scale the fire tower with no rope, who once swam across Blackwater Lake just to prove a point. Trevor had the truck old rust-bitten, but reliable. Lucas was quiet, kind of an anxious kid, but loyal, and me, I was the one who should have said no. It was Majuli, that sticky kind of hot, where even the shade feels like a sauna. We'd spent the morning throwing rocks into the creek and complaining about how boring summer had become. And then Emily said it. Let's go find the Hollow House. The world seemed to pause. Even the cicadas stopped for a second. You're kidding, Trevor said, laughing nervously. You believe that old ghost story? Lucas muttered, half joking, half-not. Emily grinned. Every town has one. We might as well see it for ourselves. What if it's just an old shack? Or some forgotten hunting cabin? Maybe we make it our hangout spot. But we all knew the rumors. How hikers vanished past the split-trunk tree. How one kid came back talking nonsense, drawing spiral symbols until he clawed through his own skin. Still, that teenage mix of bravado and curiosity won out. We grabbed flashlights, some bottled water, and set off. We passed the landmarks one by one, the dead oak with the lightning scar, the stone fence overgrown with moss, and finally, the tree with three trunks twisted together like braids. Beyond it, the forest thickened unnaturally. No animal sounds, no breeze, just heat and the oppressive stillness of a place forgotten by time. After 2 hours of hiking through underbrush and snapping branches, we found it. The Hollow House wasn't decrepit like we imagined. It wasn't crumbling or charred. It stood, tall, 2 stories, with weather-worn clapboard siding and windows that reflected nothing. But it looked wrong, too symmetrical, too clean. The door stood dead center, painted in ugly gray. No handle, no knocker, just a keyhole. Looks new, Lucas muttered. Double quotes, no footprints, no path, Emily added. But someone built this. Trevor stepped forward, and the moment his boot touched the porch, a low hum filled the air. Faint, like something vibrating through the bones of the earth. The door opened on its own. Inside, it was dark. Not pitch black, but dim like twilight, even though outside the sun still blazed. Dust floated, but the furniture, what little there was covered in white cloths, untouched. The house smelled like burnt sage and wet soil. We spread out. Trevor checked the kitchen empty. Lucas opened a hallway closet, just coats. Emily wandered upstairs, and I followed. That's when it began. At first, just a flicker at the corner of my eye. Then a voice, soft, feminine, whispering my name. Not once, but over and over. as if testing the way it sounded. "Jonah, Jonah." Emily turned. "Did you hear that?" "I thought it was you," I said. We followed the sound to a room at the end of the hall. The door was cracked open, and cold air rushed out like the house was exhaling. Inside, the room was empty, save for a mirror nailed to the wall. It didn't reflect us, not clearly. Instead, it showed a version, a twisted replica of the room, same layout, same walls, but the shadows moved. They writhed, curled, stretched. "I don't like this," Emily whispered. "Let's get the others." We ran back downstairs, only to find Trevor gone. Lucas stood in the foyer, pale as death. He went into the basement, he stammered. The door opened, and he just walked down. We called for him. No answer. The basement stairs looked wrong, too steep, too narrow. But we followed. The air thickened. Our flashlights dimmed, then flickered out completely. But the darkness wasn't total. There was a faint red glow from below, pulsing like a heartbeat. Then, we saw it. Trevor stood in the center of a wide basement chamber. Carvings covered the walls. Spirals, runes, eyes. At his feet was a hatch, metal bolted shut. He was mumbling something, words that didn't belong in any language we knew. Emily rushed forward to grab him. The second she touched him, the glow vanished. The lights returned. We were in a dusty, empty basement. No hatch, no runes. Just cobwebs and silence. Trevor collapsed. Unconscious, but breathing. We carried him out of that house and back through the forest without stopping. The woods had changed. Paths were reversed. Landmarks missing. It took us until midnight to find our way back. Trevor never spoke again. Doctors diagnosed him with some form of trauma-induced catatonia. He sits in a care home now, staring out a window. When he draws, it's always spirals, always red ink. Lucas moved to Michigan, never talked about that day again. Emily vanished. 5 years later, during a hike in Colorado, her tent was found, her gear, no sign of her, and me. I tried to move on. I did. Got a job, married, even had a kid. But every so often, usually around July, hear the hum, in the floorboards, in the air, in my bones, and sometimes, I dream of a door without a handle, and a voice behind it, whispering my name, Jonah. Jonah. So if you ever find yourself deep in the Appalachian woods, and you see a house where none should be a house, that hums, that breathes, that waits, go in, don't touch the door. And above all, don't listen when it calls your name, because once it knows you, it never forgets. Let's move to our fifth story. They called it the Screaming Shelter. Though no one remembers exactly when the name first came to be. Some say it began as a cruel joke among park rangers. Others say it came from the mouths of local children who claimed they could hear cries echoing from beneath the floorboards during cold, moonless nights. But everyone who lives within 50 miles of that rotted structure knows one thing. It should have been torn down decades ago, and something inside it does not want to be forgotten. The story begins in the winter of 2002, when 3 students from Black Hollow University, Trevor, Lena, and Marcus set out to document regional folklore for their cultural anthropology thesis, armed with nothing more than a couple of camcorders, hiking gear, and a fascination with the dark side of oral traditions. They ventured into the dense Appalachian woods. Their destination, an old ranger cabin, known in whispers as the Screaming Shelter. Long abandoned, barely marked on maps, and warned against in every local tavern. Locals said the shelter used to be a firewatch station in the 1930s. Back when men were paid to live alone for months at a time in remote mountain outposts. The last ranger to staff the cabin was Henry Maddox, a civilian Conservation Corps recruit whose final logbook entry read, "I can't sleep anymore. It calls through the trees. Not a man, not an animal. It wears my dead brother's face." Maddox disappeared in 1939. His body was never found. The trio laughed off the warnings. Folklore was supposed to be eerie. That's what made it marketable. They parked their car at the edge of a gravel road and hiked 6 miles through thick underbrush, guided by hand-drawn maps and GPS coordinates that didn't always cooperate. Around dusk, as freezing fog began to roll over the ridge, they found The cabinet looked like it had been built in a hurry, tilted, warped, leaning slightly to the right. Boards nailed over windows. A rusted chimney half collapsed. Moss clung to its sides like skin to bone. But most unsettling was the door, which wasn't latched but wedged open about an inch, as if inviting them in. As they stepped inside, a bitter cold overtook them, even colder than the air outside. The fireplace was long dead, yet ash coated the floor as if it had been used recently. That night, the sounds began. At first it was a slow scratching beneath the floorboards, rhythmic, as if something was crawling just below them. Then, around 2 a.m., Trevor swore he heard someone whisper his name. The others dismissed it. Wind plays tricks, especially up in the mountains. But by the third night, no one was sleeping. Lena recorded faint voices in her audio logs voices. That didn't belong to any of them. The tapes, when played back, revealed overlapping layers of conversation, most of them unintelligible, but always ending in the same blood-curdling scream, a human scream laced with something else, something that rang low and inhuman beneath it. On the fourth day, the group discovered a trapdoor in the floor, beneath an old rug. It was secured with rusted chains, but one of them had already been snapped in half, like it had been broken. From below, Trevor wanted to leave. He insisted they had enough footage. But Marcus Moore, curious than cautious, insisted on staying just one more night. That was the last night anyone saw him alive. Around midnight, Lena woke to the sound of someone sobbing. She assumed it was Marcus. But when she stepped into the main room, she found Trevor already awake, standing stiffly, pointing at the now open trapdoor. From the gaping black hole below came a sound neither of them could describe, a combination of whisper, growl, and song, all stitched together like a nightmare lullaby. Trevor lowered a flashlight into the trapdoor. The beam disappeared after only a few feet. No walls, no bottom, just darkness. Lena screamed as something scuttled across the floor beside her, fast and low. She caught a glimpse of a pale hand, human but wrong, with too many knuckles and long, dirt-caked nails. Trevor lunged to shut the door, but it slammed closed by itself with an earth-shaking thud. When they turned, Marcus was gone. The rest of the night passed in silence. No more scratching, no voices. Just a smothering, unnatural stillness. In the morning, Lena found her camera missing. Trevor's journal had been torn to pieces, and in its place was a single photograph neither of them had taken. Marcus standing in front of the trapdoor, his eyes entirely black, his mouth open in a silent scream. They ran, but the forest had changed. No matter which direction they turned, they always found themselves circling back toward the shelter. Trevor carved notches in trees. He tied his shirt to a branch, but it didn't matter. The cabin always found them again. And worse, it was different now. Taller. The boards on the windows had vanished. The door stood wide open. It took them 2 days to find the road. By the time they reached their car, Lena had developed strange burns on her arms in the shape of handprints. Trevor refused to speak. His final act before being institutionalized was mailing Lena the only intact footage he had left. She uploaded it online in a desperate attempt to validate what had happened. Most called it a hoax. But the footage shows something chilling at the 8-minute mark, while Marcus is setting up his gear. Something moves behind the trapdoor, a shape that watches from the shadows. Its eyes reflect red for a split second before disappearing again. No one has been able to debunk it. Years later, hikers still go missing near that region. Some claim to hear screams echoing through the trees at night. Others report seeing a man with completely black eyes wandering the trail, mouth open, as if caught in a scream that never ends. And the screaming shelter, it's still there, waiting. Let's move to our 6th story. They say, some roads don't lead anywhere. You'd want to go roads that twist through time instead of land, that vanish behind you once you pass a certain tree, or bridge, or sign you didn't notice. Our 6th story is about such a place, a forgotten path deep within the Appalachian Mountains, where the forest leans in too close, and silence feels like a warning. This story comes from a man named Marcus Hayes, a park ranger stationed at an isolated outpost in Kentucky's part of the range. Marcus had spent 15 years patrolling those hills. He was quiet, reliable, tough as they come, not the kind to rattle easily. So when his voice cracked during the emergency call on the radio, something in it made the entire ranger station go still. "It's back," he'd said. "The cabin. The one that shouldn't exist." Marcus had found the cabin once before, nearly 10 years prior. He'd been doing a routine sweep near Black Hollow, an area long closed off to the public due to landslides. It was a foggy morning, the kind where light barely filters through the trees. When he stumbled on the structure, a single-story log cabin, sunken into the earth like it had been half swallowed, its door slightly ajar. He'd thought it was old moonshiner ruins at first, until he stepped inside and found it perfectly preserved. The fireplace was still warm. The table was set for two, and on the wall, a painting grotesque and dark, showed a forest, full of eyeless figures, hands outstretched, all turned toward a single red door. But when Marcus tried to radio the find-in, his signal was jammed. Worse, when he stepped back outside, the trail was gone. Not overgrown, gone. The trees were in different places. The rocks had moved. Even the air felt wrong. He wandered for 3 days, surviving on creeks and wild berries, before finally re-emerging near the ranger station. But when he led others back to the location, maps in hand, the cabin was nowhere to be found. He didn't talk about it again. Until now, 10 years later, Marcus had been sent to investigate an illegal campsite fire scene on satellite just south of Black Hollow. He was reluctant to go, but didn't argue. Not until he radioed back, saying only, "It's back." Then came the scream, short, strangled, cut off. The signal died. A search team was dispatched immediately. What they found was wrong. The forest in that area had shifted. The usual landmarks were gone. Trees stood unnaturally close together, their bark blackened, oozing with a dark sap that smelled like iron and rot. Even the birds wouldn't fly overhead. After hours of searching, they found Marcus's pack, and nothing else. No blood. Tracks. Just his backpack, placed gently in the center of a clearing, and beneath it, his radio cracked, but still hissing softly. That night, one of the rangers on the search team, Angela Reyes, couldn't sleep. She kept hearing a low scratching sound outside her tent, but every time she opened the flap, nothing was there. When morning came, she swore she'd seen something standing in the trees, a figure made of shadows. Tall and eyeless, its limbs too long to be human. She quit the force a week later. In the weeks that followed, the forest changed again. Satellite images glitched whenever zoomed too closely on Black Hollow. Drones flown into the area lost signal. Hikers who strayed off path near the region reported seeing strange cabins different each time. Some ancient, some new, but always with a red door. Always in the wrong place. Always vanishing before they could return with others. Then, one day, the ranger station received a small, battered package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a cassette tape and a note that read, "For those who still patrol the hollow, don't listen after sunset." They played it anyway. The recording began with static, then Marcus's voice, low, hoarse, terrified. He spoke of wandering, of the cabin shifting every time he blinked. "It watches me," he whispered. "It moves when I close my eyes. The paintings change. The people in them, they get closer." Then his voice changed. It got deeper, slower, as if something else had taken over. The last thing it said before the tape cut out was, "She lives beneath the floorboards. Don't step on the third plank." The floor beneath the ranger station creaked. After that day, no one entered Black Hollow again. Official maps list the area as restricted due to ecological hazards. But locals know better. They avoid the paths that veer too far east. They warn children about the red door in the woods. And sometimes, late at night, hikers on safe trails report hearing someone calling for help. A man's voice, distant and desperate. They follow the sound until it leads them off course and deeper into the trees. But the most terrifying part, every person who's gone missing near Black Hollow in the past 20 years, their names are now etched into a wooden signpost found deep within the woods. No one knows who carved it. No one knows how it updates. But the top of the sign, freshly engraved, reads, "Welcome back, Marcus. Let's move to our Seven Saints story." The Appalachian Mountains have always been steeped in mystery and folklore. Their dense forests and winding trails hiding secrets that have unnerved locals for generations. Among the many eerie tales whispered around campfires, none was as chilling or as enduring as the legend of Howling Hollow, a place said to be cursed, where the forest itself seemed alive with sorrowful cries and unfathomable darkness. It was here that a group of 4 college friends, all thrill-seekers with a healthy dose of skepticism, decided to test their courage. Maya, Jason, Lila, and Eric had grown tired of mundane city life and craved an adventure away from prying eyes and constant noise. Drawn by the promise of rugged beauty and the allure of the unknown, they set out to explore the fabled Howling Hollow. Armed with little more than backpacks, tents, and their own disbelief in the supernatural. Their journey began in early autumn, when the leaves had just begun to turn, painting the mountains in fiery reds and golds. The trailhead was marked by an old, weather-beaten sign warning travelers to turn back. But the group laughed off the warning, joking about ghost stories and curses. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the sunlight dimmed beneath the thick canopy of ancient oaks and maples. The air grew cooler and heavier with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The usual sounds of the forest, chirping birds, rustling critters, fell silent, replaced by an oppressive quiet that seemed to press in from all sides. That first night, they made camp near a small creek where the water whispered softly over smooth stones. As the friends gathered around their crackling fire, they shared stories and laughter, the tension of the day's hike melting away. But as darkness deepened, a new sound began to creep into the night air. At first, it was distant, a faint, mournful howling that seemed to rise and fall like the wind. Maya was the first to notice it, her brow furrowing as she scanned the shadowy tree line. The howls were unlike any animal she had ever heard, raw, anguished, and almost human. Jason shrugged it off as a coyote or a wolf, but even he felt a chill crawled down his spine. The howling persisted, growing louder and more urgent, weaving in strange, sorrowful cries that made it impossible to ignore. Leela clutched her blanket tighter, eyes wide with fear, while Eric attempted to dismiss the sounds with nervous jokes. As the night wore on, the howling seemed to come closer, circling the camp like a predator stalking its prey. Sleep was impossible. The friends huddled together, listening to the unsettling chorus that echoed through the trees. Just before dawn, the sounds abruptly ceased, leaving an eerie silence that felt heavier than the howling itself. The next morning, despite exhaustion, the group pressed on, the forest around them seeming darker and more twisted. They soon discovered a moss-covered stone altar hidden beneath a tangle of roots and vines. The altar was ancient, carved with indecipherable symbols and faded runes that seemed to pulse with a strange energy. Jason, fascinated by history, speculated that it might be a relic from a Native American tribe that once inhabited the area. Maya, however, felt a cold dread wash over her as she touched the weathered surface. She recalled stories told by locals of a tribe that had cursed the hollow after a terrible betrayal, their spirits trapped to haunt the land forever. As they explored the vicinity, the atmosphere thickened. The usual forest scents were replaced by metallic temps, and the shadows seemed to stretch and writhe unnaturally. That night, the howling returned, more frantic and anguished than before, echoing off the rocky cliffs surrounding the hollow. Leela awoke to find her sleeping bag slashed, as if by claws, her heart pounding in terror. The group argued about whether to leave immediately, but Eric insisted they were overreacting, pushing to see the hollow's mysterious heart before dawn. But the forest had other plans. During the third night, Eric vanished without warning. One moment he was there, sharing a laugh around the fire, and the next, he was gone. Panic set in. Maya, Jason, and Leela searched desperately, their calls swallowed by the thick, unyielding darkness. From somewhere deep within the woods came a scream, a blood-curdling, unnatural scream filled with pain and rage that froze their blood. They found no trace of Eric, no footprints, no belongings, only the lingering echo of his terror. Days blurred into one another as the remaining friends fought to find a way out, but the forest seemed alive, twisting the paths behind them erasing their tracks, and beckoning them deeper with that haunting howling. Jason began to lose his grip on reality, muttering about shadows that moved on their own, and whispers calling his name. Lila, too, grew pale and withdrawn, haunted by nightmares and visions of ghostly figures watching them from the darkness. Desperation drove Maya to scour Eric's abandoned backpack, where she discovered a tattered journal filled with cryptic entries. The writing described an ancient curse how a tribe wronged by settlers had bound their souls to the hollow, creating a dark force that warped time and space, trapping the living in endless loops of horror. The journal warned that the howls were the voices of the lost, eternally crying out for release, and those who heard them risked becoming part of the forest's cursed legion. With every passing hour, the forest grew more menacing. Trees seemed to lean closer, their branches like skeletal fingers blocking the sky. Shadows lengthened into monstrous shapes, and the howling transformed into a hypnotic chant, luring Maya and Lila toward a hidden cave glowing with a sinister red light. Inside, they found the remains of countless travelers' bones arranged in twisted patterns, faces frozen in expressions of terror and despair. Realizing the hollow's curse was real, and that escape was slipping beyond their grasp, Maya recorded a desperate video message on her phone, hoping someone, someday, might learn the truth and heed the warning. As the howling reached a terrifying crescendo, Maya and Lila vanished into the darkness, swallowed by the forest and forever lost to the haunted depths of Howling Hollow to this day. Hikers report hearing the mournful cries late at night, seeing flickering lights near the altar, and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread near the hollow. The legend warns, if you hear the howling, resist its call. Turn back before you, to become part of the forest's endless lament, a ghost, trapped in the hollow, howling for release but finding none. ChatGPT said, "Let's move to our 8st story, titled The Silent Watcher of Pine Ridge." Deep within the shadowed folds of the Appalachian Mountains lies Pine Ridge, a remote and forgotten settlement that few outsiders have ever dared to explore. Its name barely appears on modern maps, and those who have passed through often speak of it in hushed tones, warning of a strange presence that lingers in the towering pines and dense underbrush. This is a story told to me by a man named James, a lifelong resident of the area, whose encounter with what locals call the Silent Watcher changed his life forever. James had always been a skeptic, a man grounded firmly in reality. He worked as a forest ranger, patrolling the endless wilderness of the Appalachians, keeping an eye on hikers and campers who braved the rugged terrain. Over the years, he had heard the tales whispered among locals, stories of strange lights, eerie howls, and figures glimpsed just beyond the tree line, but he dismissed them as folklore, products of overactive imaginations fueled by the isolation and superstition that ran deep in these mountains. One autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the woods grew cold and silent, James set out on a routine patrol near Pine Ridge. The wind was sharp, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. As he navigated the narrow trails, his flashlight cutting through the growing dusk, he noticed something unusual, a flicker of movement in the shadows near an old abandoned cabin. He had often passed, but never entered. The cabin was weathered and decaying, its windows shattered, and its door hanging on crooked hinges. It was a place no one visited, yet that night, something seemed to stir within. Curiosity piqued, James approached cautiously, his breath misting. In the chilly air, suddenly, a low, guttural growl broke the silence, sending a chill racing down his spine. His heart pounded as he swept his flashlight toward the source. There, standing just beyond the cabin's edge, was a figure unlike any he had ever seen. Tall and gaunt, cloaked in shadow, its eyes glowed faintly an unnatural amber hue that pierced the darkness. The creature didn't move or speak. It simply watched, silent and unblinking, as if measuring James, weighing his soul. Frozen in place, James felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over him. The air thickened, heavy with an ancient, oppressive energy. For what felt like hours, they stood locked in a silent stare, man and watcher, until the figure finally vanished into the forest like a wisp of smoke. James fled the scene, heart hammering, mind racing with questions he could not answer. In the days that followed, James found himself plagued by strange visions of the Watcher, the cabin, and a deep mournful wail echoing through the trees. The locals, upon hearing of his encounter, shared their own stories. They spoke of a guardian spirit, tied to the land, neither wholly good nor evil, bound by a curse to protect the forest from those who would harm it. Some said it was the restless soul of an ancient hunter, others believed it to be a manifestation of the mountain's wrath itself. Determined to understand, James returned to the cabin during daylight, searching for clues. Inside, he found cryptic carvings etched into the wooden wall, symbols that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Among the debris, a weathered journal told of a family who once lived there, victims of a tragic massacre long ago. The final entries hinted at a ritual meant to bind a vengeful spirit to the land, but the words were fragmented, the meaning obscured by time. As the weeks passed, James' encounters with the Silent Watcher grew more frequent and intense. He began to notice signs around Pine Ridge, unexplained footprints in the mud, strange animal carcasses left uneaten, and an eerie silence where wildlife should thrive. His nights became restless, haunted by the sense that something was always watching, waiting. One night, compelled by forces he did not understand, James ventured deep into the forest, following a trail of faint glowing symbols that appeared on trees, leading him to a hidden clearing. There, beneath the full moon, he discovered an ancient stone altar, surrounded by twisted roots and overgrown vines. The air was thick with power, and at its center lay a blood-stained tokanon, old hunting knife inscribed with the same strange symbols from the cabin. Suddenly, the Watcher emerged from the shadows, no longer distant but inches away, its amber eyes reflecting a sorrow so profound it shook James to his core. In that moment, he understood the truth. The Watcher was not a monster, but a guardian, trapped between worlds, cursed to protect the sacred forest from those who might bring destruction. James vowed to honor the Watcher's legacy, becoming a silent protector himself, guarding the secrets of Pine Ridge and respecting the fragile balance between man and nature. The Silent Watcher remained an ever-present sentinel in the heart of the Appalachian wilderness, watching, waiting, and reminding all who dared to enter that some mysteries are better left undisturbed. This is the story of the Silent Watcher of Pine Ridge, a haunting testament to the power of the unknown, lurking deep in the Appalachian Mountains. ChatGPT said, "Let's move to our 8st story, titled The Silent Watcher of Pine Ridge. Deep within the shadowed folds of the Appalachian Mountains lies Pine Ridge, a remote and forgotten settlement that few outsiders have ever dared to explore. Its name barely appears on modern maps, and those who have passed through often speak of it in hushed tones, warning of a strange presence that lingers in the towering pines and dense underbrush. This is a story told to me by a man named James, a lifelong resident of the area, whose encounter with what locals call the Silent Watcher changed his life forever." James had always been a skeptic, a man grounded firmly in reality. He worked as a forest ranger, patrolling the endless wilderness of the Appalachians, keeping an eye on hikers and campers who braved the rugged terrain. Over the years, he had heard the tales whispered among locals, stories of strange lights, eerie howls, and figures glimpsed just beyond the tree line, but he dismissed them as folklore, products of overactive imaginations fueled by the isolation and superstition that ran deep in these mountains. One autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the woods grew cold and silent, James set out on a routine patrol near Pine Ridge. The wind was sharp, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. As he navigated the narrow trails, his flashlight cutting through the growing dusk, he noticed something unusual, a flicker of movement in the shadows near an old abandoned cabin he had often passed, but never entered. The cabin was weathered and decaying, its windows shattered, and its door hanging on crooked hinges. It was a place no one visited, yet that night, something seemed to stir within. Curiosity piqued, James approached cautiously, his breath misting. In the chilly air, suddenly, a low, guttural growl broke the silence, sending a chill racing down his spine. His heart pounded as he swept his flashlight toward the source. There, standing just beyond the cabin's edge, was a figure unlike any he had ever seen. Tall and gaunt, cloaked in shadow, its eyes glowed faintly an unnatural amber hue that pierced the darkness. The creature didn't move or speak. It simply watched, silent and unblinking, as if measuring James, weighing his soul. Frozen in place, James felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over him. The air thickened, heavy with an ancient, oppressive energy. For what felt like hours, they stood locked in a silent stare, man and watcher, until the figure finally vanished into the forest like a wisp of smoke. James fled the scene, heart hammering, mind racing with questions he could not answer. In the days that followed, James found himself plagued by strange visions of the Watcher, the cabin, and a deep mournful wail echoing through the trees. The locals, upon hearing of his encounter, shared their own stories. They spoke of a guardian spirit, tied to the land, neither wholly good nor evil, bound by a curse to protect the forest from those who would harm it. Some said it was the restless soul of an ancient hunter, others believed it to be a manifestation of the mountain's wrath itself. Determined to understand, James returned to the cabin during daylight, searching for clues. Inside, he found cryptic carvings etched into the wooden wall, symbols that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Among the debris, a weathered journal told of a family who once lived there, victims of a tragic massacre long ago. The final entries hinted at a ritual meant to bind a vengeful spirit to the land, but the words were fragmented, the meaning obscured by time. As the weeks passed, James' encounters with the Silent Watcher grew more frequent and intense. He began to notice signs around Pine Ridge, unexplained footprints in the mud, strange animal carcasses left uneaten, and an eerie silence where wildlife should thrive. His nights became restless, haunted by the sense that something was always watching, waiting. One night, compelled by forces he did not understand, James ventured deep into the forest, following a trail of faint glowing symbols that appeared on trees, leading him to a hidden clearing. There, beneath the full moon, he discovered an ancient stone altar, surrounded by twisted roots and overgrown vines. The air was thick with power, and at its center lay a blood-stained tokanon, old hunting knife inscribed with the same strange symbols from the cabin. Suddenly, the Watcher emerged from the shadows, no longer distant but inches away, its amber eyes reflecting a sorrow so profound it shook James to his core. In that moment, he understood the truth. The Watcher was not a monster, but a guardian, trapped between worlds, cursed to protect the sacred forest from those who might bring destruction. James vowed to honor the Watcher's legacy, becoming a silent protector himself, guarding the secrets of Pine Ridge and respecting the fragile balance between man and nature. The Silent Watcher remained an ever-present sentinel in the heart of the Appalachian wilderness, watching, waiting, and reminding all who dared to enter that some mysteries are better left undisturbed. This is the story of the Silent Watcher of Pine Ridge, a haunting testament to the power of the unknown, lurking deep in the Appalachian Mountains. Let's move to our 10th story. They say some roads in the Appalachian region were never meant to be paved. That's what locals in a forgotten pocket of southern West Virginia will tell you if you ask about Ash Creek Hollow. Not marked on modern maps and barely traceable on the oldest ones, Ash Creek Hollow is a place lost to time and buried in whispers. For generations, stories have circulated about travelers disappearing after taking a wrong turn or being lured down its paths by lantern lights that float just out of reach. Most brush it off as backwoods folklore, but not everyone comes back to call it a tale. And this story comes from someone who barely did. Logan Myers wasn't a believer in anything that couldn't be proven by reason or explained with science. He was a graduate student in anthropology, visiting small Appalachian towns for his thesis on mountain folklore and oral traditions. He'd heard tales of witches, haints, skinwalkers, and creatures with no names, tales so bizarre he often laughed while taking notes. But the town of Black Hollow changed his tone. It sat nestled in a deep valley, surrounded by towering pine forests and fog that clung to the earth like a second skin. The people were kind, but strange. Eyes followed him everywhere. When he asked about Ash Creek Hollow, their faces turned hard. "You don't go looking for it," one man told him in a low voice outside a general store. "That place don't want to be found. And if it finds you, you're already gone." Naturally, Logan was intrigued. The next morning, he set off alone, Guided only by a crumbling hand-drawn map, a teenager slipped into his notebook during a town fair. The trail to Ash Creek Hollow wasn't marked, but it was their subtle break in the trees off a dirt road, overgrown with vines, as if the forest were trying to swallow it whole. The air grew colder the moment he stepped off the main path. Birds fell silent. The crunch of dry leaves underfoot echoed louder than it should have. About an hour into the hike, Logan found the remnants of an old wooden bridge stretching over a bone-dry creek bed. The wood was gray, soft with rot. Crossing carefully, he spotted the remains of structures hidden by thick brush-timbered cabins, sunken into the ground like they were trying to disappear. One had a door that swung on its hinge with a hollow creak. He stepped inside. The air was stale, heavy. Dust clung to his skin like static. He found faded photos nailed to the wall, faces scratched out violently. A child's shoe lay in a corner, next to a cracked porcelain doll with one eye missing. Everything inside felt off, so the house itself remembered pain. Then he noticed the floor was slightly slanted, dipping toward what looked like a trapdoor beneath a moth-eaten rug. Logan hesitated. Rationally, he knew it was a bad idea, but curiosity got the better of him. He opened it. The ladder creaked under his weight as he descended into a space colder than death. The smell was thick mildew, rot, something else. A faint glow came from a lantern hanging in the center of the room, but there were no footprints in the dust, no signs of anyone lighting it. That's when he saw the writing on the walls. Symbols, hundreds of them, etched deep into the stone, some resembling Appalachian folklore symbols, others entirely unfamiliar, like spirals swallowing themselves or eyes with 7 pupils. And in the center of the room, laid out in a perfect circle, were bones, animal and human, arranged with disturbing precision. He snapped photos. His breath came out in visible puffs. And then he heard something. It was low at first, almost a hum, like wind circling through the cavern, but it grew, became a whisper, then many, then screams. The walls pulsed as if they breathed. The lantern flickered violently. Something moved, in the circle of bones. Slowly, impossibly, a figure rose, black as pitch, limbs too long, head cocked sideways like it had forgotten how to wear a face. It didn't speak. It just pointed. Up. Logan turned and bolted up the ladder, slamming the trapdoor behind him. But outside, the world had changed. The sun was gone. The sky above Ash Creek Hollow wasn't dark. It was wrong. Stars moved in patterns that made no sense. The trees leaned toward him, their branches like fingers. He ran the path, twisted in ways it hadn't before. Time didn't exist there. His watch spun wildly. He found himself passing the same tree, over and over, one with 3 slashes carved deep into its bark. Every time he passed it, he was more exhausted, more disoriented. He tried leaving markers, only to find them moved or erased. At one point, he saw a girl standing in the fog, pale, barefoot, in a tattered dress. She didn't move. Her mouth was open too wide. When he blinked, she was gone. He wasn't sure how long he was trapped there. It felt like days. His camera malfunctioned. His phone was dead. He stopped hearing animals. He stopped hearing anything. Just his breathing and a steady, pulsing beat like a heartbeat, coming from the earth itself. And then, somehow, he stumbled out. He didn't remember walking, just collapsing by a ranger station at the edge of the forest. They found him 3 days after he vanished. His skin was scratched in symbols. He spoke a language no one understood for the first few hours. Then he went silent. Logan never finished his thesis. He left school, moved across the country, changed his name. But 2 months ago, a box arrived at the anthropology department, addressed to no one. Inside were photos. Dozens of them. Photos Logan had taken in Ash Creek Hollow, including one no one could explain. It showed the interior of the cellar, the bone circle. But in the center stood Logan, frozen, eyes black, mouth wide open in a scream that couldn't be heard. To this day, the photo hasn't been debunked, and no one has been able to find Ash Creek Hollow, again, not even the locals. Some roads, they say, were never meant to be found. Let's move to our 11th story. They called it the Hollow Tree Trail, a forgotten stretch of dirt and roots winding deep into the Appalachian backwoods. Marked by nothing more than a sun-bleached plank, nailed crookedly into a tree that leaned like it was tired of standing. The locals whispered that the trail wasn't on any official maps, that it moved every few years, vanishing from one hollow and reappearing in another, like it had a mind of its own. No one could say when the trail had first appeared, only that old men remembered their grandfathers warning them never to step foot on it. But warnings fade when curiosity festers. And for a small group of college hikers, 3 friends from Boone, who fancied themselves amateur explorers, the Forbidden Trail was the perfect challenge for their weekend adventure. Jesse, the bold one, had found the trailhead by accident while following deer tracks off the main route. He marked it on GPS, laughed off the stories he heard from a weathered man at a nearby gas station, and convinced his friends Aaron and Caleb to pack up for a 3-day hike into what he called the haunted guts of the Appalachians. They set out on a crisp October morning, the sky bruised with early fog, the air carrying that particular silence only found deep in ancient forests, a silence that seemed to breathe. The trail was unlike anything they'd walked before, too narrow, too dark, too still. Trees leaned in unnaturally, their branches arched like gnarled arms, and there was no birdsong, no animal sounds, not even the buzz of insects. The deeper they went, the more wrong things felt. They started to notice strange symbols carved into the bark of trees, not initials or dates, like bored hikers might leave, but crude runes, angry spirals, and harsh jagged figures that hurt the eye to stare at. And though they'd brought enough food, something about the trail made them ravenous, as if the woods were draining them. They passed an old stone marker halfway buried in moss, with words chiseled in a language none of them recognized, and a chill ran through Erin so hard she vomited right there. Caleb started having dreams at night, vivid ones of being chased by something tall and black-eyed, with the antlers of a stag and the teeth of a man. He said he woke up to whispering right outside the tent, but no one else heard it, until Jesse admitted the next morning that he'd dreamed the same thing. Erin tried to turn back, but no matter which way they walked, the trail looped and led them right back to the stone marker. On the 3rd night, their fire wouldn't light. The lighters sparked, the matches burned, but went out instantly. They huddled together in the pitch dark, listening to something pace around the tent, slow, deliberate footsteps. Something brushed against the nylon, and a low sound, like a long inhale, vibrated the ground. Jesse, ever stubborn, crawled out to confront whatever it was, swinging his flashlight like a weapon. The beam cut through trees, but all it caught was the blur of something impossibly tall, stepping back behind a trunk. Jesse screamed once, sharp and short, and then silence. When Aaron and Caleb crawled out to find him, all they saw were his shoes sitting side by side on the path, and his flashlight flickering weakly in the leaves. They called for him for hours, but the forest gave nothing back. They tried to leave at first light, but the trail twisted again, this time looping so fast they passed the same broken branch every 10 minutes. Caleb, sleep-deprived and spiraling, started mumbling to himself in what sounded like the language carved on the trees. Aaron tried to snap him out of it, but by the next morning, he was gone too. Not vanished like Jesse, but kneeling in front of the stone marker, whispering feverishly, eyes rolled back, skin pale and damp like stone. She tried to drag him away, but he screamed, not at her, but at the sky, and something answered from the woods. A howl made of thousands of voices, all twisted into one awful sound. She ran. She didn't know how long she ran, only that the trail began to fight her roots, tripping her branches, clawing her skin. The forest bled when she scratched the trees, thick black sap, oozing like blood. She saw faces in the bark, mouths stretched, in silent screams. At some point, she stumbled into a clearing she didn't recognize, where a massive tree sat in the center, hollow, black, and humming. The tree pulsed like a heartbeat, and she realized the trail had led her here on purpose. Her legs wouldn't move. Her voice caught in her throat. A wind blew through, but it carried no air, only that same whispering language curling into her ears like worms. The hollow of the tree opened wider, and inside she saw herself. Not a reflection, not a vision, but a second Aaron eyes, empty skin gray, mouth stitched shut. The thing raised its hand and pointed. Behind her. She turned. The antlered man stood there, tall, impossibly gaunt, its limbs too long, its smile too wide, eyes like pits. It didn't speak, it didn't have to. She felt her thoughts unravel, her memories scatter. She forgot her name. She forgot what sunlight looked like. The last thing she remembered was the scent of earth, rot, and blood. That was 3 years ago. A hiker found her wandering near a highway 70 miles from where the trailhead should have been, barefoot, hair white, eyes blank. She hasn't spoken a word since. The GPS on Jessie's phone, recovered months later, showed paths that didn't exist. It recorded them walking in perfect circles for days, even though they'd climbed hills and crossed streams. Caleb's body was never found. The forest never gave him back. Locals say the hollow tree trail has vanished again, waiting for the next voice, curious enough to speak its name. They say the antlered man walks behind those who talk too loudly about it. And in Boone, at the edge of the woods, there's a hospital, where a girl sits silently at her window, drawing trees over and over in crayon. Every tree has a hollow. Every hollow has a face. And if you look too long, the face starts to look like your own. Let's move to our 12th story. The crying stones of Blood Ridge Hollow. Nestled deep in the shadowy arms of the Appalachian Mountains lies a long-forgotten mining town called Blood Ridge Hollow, a place once bursting with industry. Now nothing more than whispers, rot, and stone. The land remembers what happened there, even if the maps do not. And some say the stones weep not rain, but tears. Real ones. That's where this story begins. With a man named Eli Hargrove, a geologist from West Virginia University, and a field trip that was never supposed to turn into a legend. Eli was a man of science, pragmatic, dismissive of folklore, the sort who rolled his eyes at ghost stories and Appalachian myths, until he found himself assigned to survey seismic faults in the region. The university had received odd readings, tremors that didn't match any tectonic patterns. Strange activity. His job was to investigate. Blood Ridge Hollow wasn't on modern GPS maps, but the coordinates pointed their end. So Eli packed his gear, field recorder, soil kits, and headed into the mountains, alone, armed with logic, data, and a strong disbelief in the supernatural. But the moment he crossed into the hollow, something shifted. His compass refused to settle. The trees grew twisted, gnarled as if recoiling from some ancient trauma. And then, there were the stones, mounds of smooth, round rocks placed deliberately, in strange configurations throughout the forest, stacked like cairns, but weathered beyond belief. And when Eli touched one, it was wet. Not from dew, not from rain. The stone wept a clear liquid, viscous and cold. And the moment his skin made contact, a scream distant and faintly through the trees. He recorded everything, of course. Notes, voice logs. Moisture on surface, inconsistent with climate, he muttered. Auditory hallucinations, likely due to altitude or stress. But the hallucinations didn't stop. As he followed the readings deeper into the valley, the voices began. First soft, then clearer. Always the same words, repeated again and again in different tones. Different timbres, like a chorus. We are still here. On the second day, he found the mine entrance, a black mouth in the stone. Mostly collapsed, but still large enough to crawl into. Against better judgment, and guided by both curiosity and arrogance, Eli entered with his headlamp and a small GoPro inside. The walls were carved with something he couldn't explain. Lifts that weren't mining marks, spirals, eye shapes that shifted when you stared too long. He followed the tunnel down until he found the first body, or what remained of it. A skeleton lay half buried in dust and rock, its jaw dislocated, fingers missing. It had not died naturally that Eli was certain. The rocks around it were stained dark, almost black, and nearby, etched into the stone wall, in what looked like fingernail scratches, were words, "They took my voice." Eli stumbled back. He wasn't hallucinating now. He knew what he was seeing. The deeper he went, the more remains he found. Men, women, and children, trapped in an unrecorded tragedy. But there were no signs of cave-ins, no structural collapse. Just bodies, all preserved as if they'd died yesterday, clothes brittle, but blood still dark. The further in he traveled, the louder the voices became, not around him, inside him. They told him the story in fractured whispers. Bloodridge Hollow hadn't been a normal mining town. It was a vein not of coal or gold, but of something older, an ancient mineral that shimmered like obsidian, but hummed with low, almost musical vibrations. The townsfolk began to mine it obsessively. But the stone didn't like being taken. It was alive. A kind of sentience woven into the earth itself. And when the quarry was deep enough, the stones cried. Not metaphorically, literally. Cries that infected the minds of the miners, drove them to madness, to violence, to rituals. Eventually, the entire town went quiet. The government, or something worse, erased it, covered it with soil and memory. Eli tried to leave that night, but the path he entered on no longer existed. Every trail looped back to the mine. The GPS blinked erratically. His recordings were corrupted with whispers. "Join us," they said. "See through stone." He stopped sleeping. The stones began to appear closer to camp, circling him, as if rearranging themselves each night. When he smashed one, in desperation, it bled not water, but thick red sap. And from within the hollow, something screamed like it had lost a child. The final log on Eli's recorder was found weeks later, by a rescue team who never located him. It was mostly static, and the sound of running, but near the end, a clear voice Eli spoke one last message. The stones cry because they remember. They remember what was buried beneath them. They remember us. And now, they're remembering me. That was the last anyone ever heard from Bloodridge Hollow. The university disavowed the project. The map coordinates now lead to empty woods, but hikers still whisper about the place. Sometimes, they find weeping stones in the mist. Sometimes, they hear a voice they don't recognize, calling them deeper. And if you ever hear the words, "We are still here," carried on the wind, turn around, because the stones are listening, and they don't forget. Let's move to our 13 saint story, one that lingers in the mind like a cold breath on a moonless night, whispers beneath the hollow. Deep within the endless folds of the Appalachian Mountains, hidden beyond the well-trodden paths, and forgotten by all but the oldest locals, lies a place shrouded in shadow and silence, Whisper Hollow. This valley is not marked on any modern map, and those who speak of it do so in hushed, fearful tones, as if the very mention might summon the ancient darkness that dwells there. For generations, the people of nearby Maple Creek have told stories half forgotten. Legends passed down around campfires and kitchen tables of strange voices riding the wind. Spectral figures glimpsed between the trees, and an oppressive feeling that something alive and malevolent watches from the depths of the forest. Into this world steps Jacob Turner, a historian and folklorist, whose fascination with Appalachian myths draws him to the hollow, armed with books, recordings, and an insatiable thirst for truth. Jacob arrives in Maple Creek during the crisp chill of autumn, welcomed by wary faces and guarded warnings. The townsfolk speak of vanished hikers, hunters who never returned, and children lured into the woods by a soft, beckoning song, never to be seen again. Despite the stories, or perhaps because of them, Jacob sets up camp in the heart of the hollow, at a clearing ringed by ancient, moss-covered standing stones, carved with symbols no one alive can decipher. The first night, silence is absolute. No insects hum, no animals stir. Only the faintest whisper, barely audible at first, slipping through the air like a breath from another world. The whispers grow, twisting into words in a language older than any known to man. To Jacob's horror, he begins to understand them, as if the hollow itself is speaking directly to him. They tell tales of a tribe long lost to history, whose desperate rituals bound a malevolent spirit beneath the earth, an entity fueled by rage, sorrow, and eternal vengeance. The spirit's prison is fragile, and the hollow is a gateway where the veil between worlds thins, allowing the restless dead to cry out from their shadowed tomb. Jacob's nights grow darker, his dreams invaded by visions of bloodied faces, twisted ceremonies, and the spirit's endless fury. One night, as the whispers reach a fevered pitch, the earth beneath his camp trembles violently, and a fissure opens near the standing stones. From this abyss come flickers of ghostly blue light and tortured screams that claw at the edges of sanity. A cold, unseen force seizes Jacob's ankle, dragging him toward the yawning crack. He fights with desperate strength, but the hollow's grasp is relentless, pulling him into the suffocating darkness below. As he is dragged down, the walls of the cavern reveal murals painted by the ancient tribe depictions of the spirit's binding, the sacrifices made to contain it, and warnings carved into stone for those foolish enough to trespass. The air is thick with dampness and decay, and spectral faces flicker in the shadows, their hollow eyes begging for release or revenge. Struggling against the crushing weight of the curse, Jacob's mind floods with the agony of those trapped beneath the hollow, their voices merging with the whispers that now fill his very soul. Summoning a final surge of will, he claws free from the spirit's grasp. Bursting from the earth as dawn's pale light breaks over the valley. Shaken and forever changed, Jacob flees the hollow, carrying with him the terrifying knowledge that some secrets are buried for a reason, and some whispers are echoes of horrors that defy human understanding. The people of Maple Creek listen in silence as Jacob recounts his ordeal, their eyes haunted by memories of lost loved ones and the dark history that binds them all. Whisper Hollow remains untouched, a place where ancient curses sleep uneasily. Beneath the forest floor, and where every gust of wind carries a warning, some places are meant to stay forgotten. This is the final chapter of our Appalachian journey, a story to remind us that beneath the beauty of these timeless mountains lies a darkness waiting, watching, and whispering. If you have the courage to hear more tales like this, don't forget to subscribe to Farcical Fears, where shadows come alive, and every whisper tells a story you'll never forget.